In a news conference just a few minutes ago, President Donald Trump has disclosed that he doesn't plan on providing any meaningful assistance to Ukraine, instead stating that simply Russia has won and that Vladimir Putin will be able to dictate the terms of surrender to Ukraine as he pleases. Now, unfortunately for the president, he is not, in fact, king of planet Earth and does not actually get to decide when the war in Ukraine ends or when Ukraine stops resisting Russian invasion. But I want to just let you guys hear it from his own mouth because, again, I literally didn't believe it when I heard these stories. But we're going to be breaking that down, plus just the absolute fire hose of nonsense coming out of him, right? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's do it. By the way, guys, hit subscribe if you appreciate this analysis, right? It helps tell YouTube that I'm a legitimate channel and not some kind of, misinformation, disinformation fire hose, right? Obviously, of course, if you wanted that, you would have to look no further than apparently the President of the United States. Just take a listen to this.
Zelensky, he wasn't.
Well, you know what? That's another.
But the Trumpy's been good. Yeah. Go ahead, Rob.
Nice tie, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. I like yours too.
Two questions. One on peace. Why don't you think any other European countries are offering a peace deal? It seems like no one's come to the table for peace except for you.
Yeah. It's a very good question. Sometimes questions aren't answerable. They're in a very unusual position. They don't know how to end the war. I think I do know how to end the war. And despite the Russia hoax, I've always had a good relationship with Putin. He wants to end the war. He wants to end it. And I think he's going to be more generous than he has to be.
So, listen. Right there, I want to point out we already have some level of insanity here. The first is that no European country has moved towards peace. This is just not true. You can see here, again, June 2024, Ukraine Peace Summit. You may be like, Paul, you talk about this all the time. Well, the president is wrong about this all the time. So I keep having to beat it to death. Because again, when you guys are out in the world and somebody says these things, right, you should ask them the simple question that the fact that there isn't a reporter in the White House who's willing to say, why do you think this doesn't count? And I want to point out that this was a peace summit that was hosted as really prepared for over the course of nearly a year. 92 nations, right? There's only 210 nations on planet Earth. 92 nations attended. It was held in the neutral country of Switzerland. And included an invite to Russia. It included, now, this isn't just a meeting of pro-Ukrainian countries. Obviously the European and G7 attended, but Russian allies like India, South Africa, Brazil, Turkey, as well as China, also attended. And this resulted in, because Russia refused to attend, right, despite issuing a proposal the same day, should tell you exactly what their real desires were, which was to continue, right? Putin stated, he said, quote, his proposal is not about a temporary truce. It is not about freezing the conflict. It's about its final resolution. A little bit dangerous there, right? And Putin said, of course, we would have to, Ukraine would have to surrender all of the occupied territories, and considerable additional territory before he is going to consider even a ceasefire. So, Putin was never serious about this, because if he was, he would have said the exact same thing at the actual peace conference sitting with his allies, because that would be a true start to negotiations. So that's the question is, why did Ukraine put together a giant peace conference if in reality the Russians never even bothered to attend? And the real question is, how does the president of the United States not know an event that happened a mere 8 months prior? And the answer is, of course, that he either has serious memory issues, which is possible for a man in his 80s, but Trump seems fairly cognitively intact. And so I think he simply wants to give Putin what he wants because, as he says, Putin is a friend, but friend for the president, right? The president doesn't seem to have friends as you and I understand them, which is two people who, or two entities that engage in sort of that don't engage in scorekeeping, right? Like I don't sit there and have a ledger of every time, I've loaned my friend a screwdriver or loaned my neighbor a screwdriver. But Trump does. He's transactional. And so that implies the existence of a transaction with Vladimir Putin, either at some point in the past or some sort of promise of a transaction in the future.
And that's pretty good. That means a lot of good things. Because frankly, you could have made a great deal if this war never started, you could have made a great deal. I don't know that anything would have had to be given up. This was not a war that was going to start, Brian. And it didn't start. For 4 years, somebody said, well, how do we know that? Well, for 4 years, it didn't start.
Now, what I want to point out is that during those 4 years, the national security advisor to Trump was a man named H.R. McMaster. He's a very respected, obviously right of center general. Right. And during those 4 years, if this policy was truly successful, H.R. McMaster would have been an essential part of that. And he has said that the president's stance of bailing on Ukraine, in fact, one of the reasons Trump argues that the war didn't start during his tenure was because he provided military aid, javelins, and other lethal assistance to Ukraine. And so to sit there and say, well, the war didn't start because of me, and now I'm going to do all of the opposite things, right, to ensure that the war ends, doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? And H.R. McMaster himself has said, this is a mistake. Abandoning Ukraine is a mistake.
To speak to Vladimir about it. I used to speak to him about it at length. It was the apple of his eye, but there was no way he was going in. And he knew.
Well, interesting. He said, I used to speak to Vladimir Putin at length about it. He said it was the apple of his eye. Wait, I thought this war never had to happen. I thought this was defensive. How come, did Trump just out that the whole NATO encirclement is a farce, right? Did Vladimir Putin actually say, oh, it's the apple of my eye? This is insane. This is pure insanity, guys. Because remember, for years, the right-wing media and really the Russian talking points have been that Russia felt threatened. They felt encircled by NATO. And now the president says, well, in my private conversations, Vladimir Putin said it was the apple of his eye. He wanted it so badly, which is the exact opposite of a defensive war, right?
There were going to be consequences. But it did start. I mean, think of what happened. Inflation, you have the war with Ukraine and Russia, that wouldn't have happened. October 7th would have never happened. Israel, they had no money. Iran had no money. Iran was stone cold broke, and now they have a lot of money. And that's going to be the next thing you'll be talking about is Iran. What's going to happen with Iran? And there'll be some interesting days ahead. That's all I can tell you. We're down to final strokes with Iran. That's going to be an interesting time. And we'll see what happens. But we're down to the final moments. We're at final moments. You can't let them have a nuclear weapon. I think that I would have had a deal within 1 month after the rigged election of 2020. They were all set to make a deal. And then when I lost, they saw this person who's a stupid person, very stupid person. And they said, let's not make a deal. And they were right. He took the sanctions off. They became rich under Biden. They went from having no money to having $300 billion. All in a short period. It's oil. Oil builds up fast. It's a nice living if you have a nice oil well. And they do. They have a lot of nice oil.
Okay, he's all over the place. This is normal.
So anyway, it's going to be a big thing. It's an interesting time in a situation with Iran. Talking about that pretty soon, I guess, and hopefully we can have a peace deal. I'm not speaking out of strength or weakness. I'm just saying I'd rather see a peace deal than the other, but the other will solve the problem.
Mr. President, your allies are calling on you to pardon Derek Chauvin. Are you considering?
What? Okay, wait. Okay.
Ukraine. Is security guarantees for Ukraine. Is that a possibility, Mr. President?
So before I even think about that, I want to settle the war, get it finished.
Okay, so I want to point out that Ukraine has said we can't end the war without a security guarantee because we are confident Russia will simply reinvade. So Trump says there is no security guarantee. We're going to end the war first, right? And if Ukraine has said we can't stop fighting because without a security guarantee, Russia will simply rebuild and return stronger than ever, right? In days, weeks, or months. And so right there tells Trump is giving the game away. He's saying, well, if we can't give Ukraine the deal that he needs, the security that the country needs, then the only option is for Putin to inflict a defeat on Ukraine.
Because if I'm not here, nobody's going to settle it. And President Macron has said that, and everybody said that, the prime ministers and presidents. We're pushing very hard. That's all I'm thinking about now. As far as the question about security later, that's the easy part. The hard part is getting it settled. We got to get them.
Well, again, if it were the easy part, this is obvious, then that would be on the table. You notice that the mineral deal, one of the reasons that Ukraine has been reluctant to sign that deal was because it contained no security guarantees, despite the fact that Trump's staff around him have said, well, there's an implied security guarantee because the U.S. would defend its companies with its military. And that has not historically been the case. U.S. companies that operate in other territories are not defended by the U.S. military as a universally true fact. While sometimes those things happen, it is not the same thing. And if it were true, then it would be placed in writing. There would be an agreement that says the U.S. would defend any incursion from Russia beyond a certain range or reason.
We're losing 2,000 human beings every week. More than that, actually. 2,000 nice, young, although they're getting older because they're drafting much older now. In the case of one country, much older, because a lot of the young people have been killed.
Okay, that's not correct. He's, again, I think he's referring to Ukraine. One, Russia doesn't have a draft. They have mobilization. Two, Ukraine doesn't draft their youngest generation because of a population. Basically, the post-Soviet generation is too small, and Ukraine has said in an effort to protect them and not have them get killed in this war, we are intentionally drafting people only who are older than 27. So this is just not true. And again, these are like basic facts about the war that almost any viewer on this channel is likely aware of. And so it really is disturbing to hear the U.S. president, who has presumably, or at least before Doge cut them all, the largest intelligence apparatus in the world, he seems to not understand basic facts.
It's very sad, and I'd like to see if I could stop that. And I'd like to also see if we could stop making these massive payments from the United States. I mean, Biden gave away money like it was water, with no anything, got nothing for it. Europe did it in the form of a loan.
That's not true. And what I want to point out, Trump says, oh, they got nothing for it, which is objectively untrue. We got to eliminate the military of one of our strategic competitors, a country who has systematically tried to destroy the United States. That is what we spend our defense budget on. Our defense budget exists to deter and, if necessary, destroy America's enemies. And if you think Russia isn't an enemy, we're going to lay out later in this video the overwhelming evidence that Russia was and continues to be a direct enemy of the United States. But I want to point some things out. First off is that the president and his Truth Social absolutely just rolling out insanity after insanity. And we got to just lay out some evidence here, right? First off, he literally is out here being like, well, okay, I'm totally abandoning Ukraine. But then he says, well, based on the fact that Russia is absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield right now, I am strongly considering, which is the weakest language the president uses in this sort of situation, large-scale banking sanctions, tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and final settlement is reached. And I point this out because this is already the case. No U.S. bank can service any entity that does business with Russia. That's one of the reasons that even Chinese banks, even small local Chinese banks, are absolutely getting sanctioned, are getting hit with massive U.S. sanctions because the U.S. says, listen, you can either do business with Russia or do business with us. And that's true of most companies. The only exceptions are, of course, European oil sanctions. Again, which we've talked about ad nauseum on this channel, is true. It is a massive flaw in the sanctions program because Europe at the time was grappling with high inflation, and they said, we can't sanction Russian oil. It is the thing, the fuel for our economies. But I don't think they ever thought this war was going to go on for 3 years. And the idea that Europe was that they were going to try to use this time to pivot to alternative energies. And so the fact that Europe hasn't, because they have, not just sort of green energy or nuclear energy, but also pivot towards alternate suppliers of oil, right? They've had 3 years to build out that infrastructure. They have not. There has been no economic incentive to do so. And so, again, sanctions have some flaws, but the flaws are not from the United States. We're a net oil exporter. We should be selling our oil to Europe. And again, a more strategic president would say, yes, that is actually our entire intention. And if Biden, again, wasn't trying to row his boat in 6 different directions, he would have been able to do so. He would have said, listen, the U.S., we are committed to defeating Russia in this war, and we are going to sanction them, including their oil. And we are going to expand our oil production so that we can sell LNG and oil to the Russians. This is actually one of the things that Speaker of the House Mike Johnson pushed so hard for, right? He said, he's like, listen, the U.S. has a natural gas terminal that could flood the market with U.S. natural gas and damage Russia's ability to sell it. But the Biden administration, for climate reasons, declined to approve it. So again, this a classic example right there of sort of the flaws in Biden's policy and one of the reasons why he was so unpopular in his handling of this war. But there are degrees of bad, right? You get a C on a test, you're like, damn, I did bad, but you could do a lot worse. And right now, the way Trump is handling this, Biden was getting like a C minus. This is like an F. F for failure and, absolute just a failure to support our allies. I don't know what else to tell you. Now, here's what I want to point out too. Russia is not currently pounding Ukraine, right, on the battlefield. In fact, Russia's battlefield successes have been as muted as they've been in years, right? In fact, just a few days ago, we've started to see more and more localized Ukrainian counterattacks in a number of different areas. You can see here near Zapadina, Ukrainian forces pushing back. And you can also see that, for a battlefield that is subject to a bunch of what the president calls brutal pounding by Russian forces, there's really not been a ton of actions by the Russians. You can see actually here again, this is the 3rd, 4th. You can see all these areas here outside Pokrovsk. You can see this is the main effort, by the way, of the Russian military at this time in Ukraine. I think they have another effort in Kursk, but that has stalled. Russia, the only place Russia is really locking in and attempting to make significant progress is again in Kursk, where they have attrited a large amount of the Ukrainian salient there. And again, this isn't a channel that is never going to criticize Ukraine. I think the Kursk incursion probably was a miscalculation. It's diverted massive resources. And ultimately, every time Ukraine has tried to establish a salient relative to Russia, it just simply hasn't played out, right? Their best fighting is defensive. But again, what I want to point out is that this is an example of the president's negotiations. This is why we should take some of his statements with a huge grain of salt, right? And here is from 2 days ago, in which he says, Hamas, you can release all the hostages now, not later, and immediately return all of the bodies of hostages who were killed. And he says, or else it's over for you. And then he proceeds to insult them, which is, of course, a great negotiating tactic. And trust me, I am no fan of Hamas and I'm no fan of terrorists. But if you're negotiating with them, pointlessly name calling is not going to help you get your way. Right. Then, of course, he threatens all the civilians of Gaza, which is a war crime. And so, again, this is and then signs it with his name and lets everyone know that this is being done in an official capacity. So this sort of insanity, again, Hamas said, no, you won't. You won't do any of that stuff. And they were right. The president has done none of those things. They face no consequences. His threats are just empty tweets of a curmudgeon-y old man, right? And that itself is troubling, because if that strongly worded a tweet, a non-state actor, a crippled country like Hamas, is able to brush off and say nothing's going to happen to us. Russia for sure is going to brush off Trump strongly considering something. Now, before we talk about the numerous ways in which Russia is not a friend, in which Putin is not generous, in which Zelensky is obviously advocating for peace, and even shockingly, the Republicans in Congress are starting, maybe potentially growing a spine. I wanted to mention the most important thing is that we're also going to talk about Elon Musk and his brilliant Doge, which is being run about as well as his other companies, right? And I always remind you guys that as a business owner myself, I like to think that I'm doing things the right way, not the Elon way. Why? Because I have Strike Gum. Strike Gum isn't like your Cybertruck, right? Your Cybertruck was supposed to have full self-drive and be able to scale a huge mountain and sail under the seas or whatever. Elon Musk has made so many promises we can't even keep track of them all. But Strike Gum is different. Strike Gum is an entire energy drink in a single piece of gum. Why? Because from day one, we've done what we said we were going to do, which is put 90 milligrams of caffeine in a piece of gum. That's as much as an Amp Energy, as much as a Red Bull. We have zero sugar, no BS. Elon, all BS, right? Strike Gum fits in your pocket. A Cybertruck barely fits in a parking spot. It's a no-brainer which company you want to support, right? Elon, of course, goes to any country that offers him the best tax breaks. South Africa, Canada, the United States. Strike Gum, made in America, veteran-owned. It's literally made down in Denver, Colorado. So if you're looking for the better way to fuel and dominate your day, Strike Gum is where you want to be, right? It's combat tested. We've given it to Ukrainian drone pilots who literally messaged me on Signal and said, send more gum. So again, it's a no-brainer. You can check us out on strikegum.com or on Amazon. Okay, now, I'm going to point some stuff out. Is that Trump says Vladimir Putin holds all the cards, but if you hold all the cards, why would he need to launch a massive disinformation campaign, an information warfare campaign? And right, people say, oh, disinformation, but that's not the words Russia uses to do this, right? They have what's called the Gerasimov Doctrine, which holds that cyber information operations, information warfare is as important as actual military warfare. It's one of the reasons why smart, highly educated Russians aren't carrying AKs on the battlefield. That's the job of drunks and drug users in Russia. They are in giant troll farms producing AI-powered disinformation. And that's not me, right? This is something that has been reported and has been going on for years, literally since before the start of the war, right? They reported, for example, the Washington Post revealed that the Russian Foreign Ministry was using disinformation targeted to weaken Western countries, particularly the United States, which Russia says objects to its capitalist ideology. And Russia claims to want to uphold a Marxist-Leninist ideology, which is hilarious because the Russian state through the like Russia is a classic corporatist system in which corporations and the government, major corporations and the government are in bed with each other. There's a reason why there aren't any startups of meaning coming out of Russia. It's because startups really, if you're not inside the government already, you're a problem. Right? There can be no Google in Russia because Google would get crushed by an oligarch as soon as they became high enough to get on their radar. So I wouldn't exactly sit there and say Russia's Marxist-Leninist, but the important thing is that they hate the United States. And I hate to be like they literally hate our freedom, but yeah, they kind of hate the idea that we keep making big, powerful companies with phenomenal intelligence and phenomenal like entrepreneurial spirit, right? Of course, the Post noted Russian information warfare also attempts to disrupt American and European domestic politics. And this was done to explicitly, Russia's goal is to shift the balance of power from the West to Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. It's literally in Russia's official stated doctrine that our goal is to destroy the West. Right? So when the president of the United States says things like Vladimir Putin is my friend, well, that is incompatible with the data, right? Russia was, of course, seeking to spread conspiracy theories among the American far right to undermine support for Ukraine. This is things like the biolabs theory, the Zelensky is a secret Nazi theory, all these other kinds of things. Voice of America, right, reported that Russian disinformation campaigns have focused on promoting American isolationism, tensions between various races, and border security concerns, right? And this is one of those things where Russia does what it does best. It takes real issues and turns them into mega issues. Right? It, for example, has convinced large numbers of Americans that cartel activity, for example, something that's been relatively stable in the United States, it's a problem. Cartels are bad, right? And they're facilitating human trafficking. But the problem has not gotten any worse really over the last decade or so. But it seems like most Americans believe that it is a imminent threat on par with a foreign nation invading, right? All of these kinds of things. We've seen similar things about all sorts of various racial issues in the United States. Again, where for years they've taken real issues and amplified them to the point where people have some unhinged beliefs around it. And trust me, that is not exclusive to the American right. It is something that is almost frighteningly pervasive. But there's so much more that happens here. For example, in 2020, just a few months ago, the U.S. Department of Justice revealed that there was up to 30 internet domains that were created to mimic real websites, including Elon Musk's X and the Wall Street Journal, where they intentionally attempted to amplify or create fake websites to promote Russian information. This is called the doppelganger effect, where they created doppelganger websites that really focused on four major messages, which is the sanctions against Russia aren't working, which is weird. It's almost like Trump said the same thing just now, that Westerners are actually pointlessly afraid of Russia. Also something we just heard from the president. The Ukrainian army is barbaric and made up of neo-Nazis. We have not heard that. And Ukrainian refugees are a burden on European countries, which is interesting because Trump just announced that he was going to revoke the status of the Ukrainian refugees living in the United States. And so it's fascinating that, again, that the Russians have created, again, all of these fake sites that mimic the major news outlets like Der Spiegel, Le Parisien, Fox News, and the Washington Post, right? Of course, they've also pushed articles criticizing the LGBTQ movement, right? Something outlawed in Russia, and raised doubts about the competence of the military. This is pretty standard stuff. We notice that, you see it in so many of these internet comments that say things like, oh, the American military, you're weak. I would never join the military. The military is full of cowards, which is weird that our military aid to Ukraine, giving them our spare parts, proved sufficient to stalemate the Russian military, despite the fact that, again, so much of the Russian information warfare says that the U.S. military is weaker than ever. Weird stuff, right? Of course, I want to point out one of the most important things is that Elon Musk has admitted to being in contact with Vladimir Putin, something that the Kremlin spokesman actually confirmed. So, do these collective actions sound like someone who is an ally of the United States? Does it sound like someone who is the U.S.'s friend and partner in the globe? No, of course not, right? Now, I want to point out a few other fun facts. One, is that Zelensky, in addition to hosting a literal peace conference that Russia refused to attend, also posted, again, we are trying to get peace here. We are trying to. We're looking to have a truce in the sky, right? We value our independence. We just need to get some kind of constructive communication. We're happy to sign your deal on minerals and security, right? And you notice that, again, the mineral deal, and all of a sudden, the president forgot all about it. And so this is just complete absurdity. So absurd that even Republicans in Congress are starting to, in the most passive, slightest ways, actually say that maybe the president is wrong. For example, Republican Senator Tom Tillis said, it's a concern for the Ukrainian people that Trump has stopped sharing intelligence and military aid. I worry more about how people on the battlefield feel about it, right? And Tillis also said the pause, quote, could be helpful to Putin. Now, you think? Right? He said, I know it's hard for the people in Ukraine. I was there just 2 weeks ago. Right? And again, Tillis said, well, it's okay, I guess, to pause in the short term as a negotiation tactic, but we just saw Zelensky said, I'll sign the deal, dude. I'll sign your mineral deal. And he says, Tom Tillis says, I hope it's short-lived. I think it will be. Right? Susan Collins from Maine, right, said, I don't think we should be pausing our efforts. It's the Ukrainians who are shedding blood. It's a critical time for Ukraine, right? Again, we're missing the magic words here, which is the president is wrong. Again, Congress does not work for the president, and it's shocking that this is true, right? One lawmaker who literally refused to give his name, right, despite the fact that, again, he doesn't work for the president, refused to give his name, said it was pointlessly punitive to deport thousands of Ukrainian refugees. He says, quote, we've given them everything from jobs to housing until they get legal status, and now we revoke their legal status, which is sort of insane. He's like, guys, once we gave them legal status, they could work and pay taxes. That's a good thing, right? Senator Todd Young, right, was like, I hope we can come together and close the gap. So we're seeing just the first hints, right? Senate Majority Leader was like, no, guys, I swear it's temporary. I swear we'll be able to get to the table. I swear. Lindsey Graham, it was like, I'm very worried about the long term. He said it gives Ukraine an edge. He means Russia. Or maybe he's talking about the mineral deal. This is just absolutely just a level of cowardice. Wait. We have one. Mike Rounds from South Dakota actually manages to say, I disagree with it. So there you go. There you go, guys. We've proven it. We can publish it in a journal that says that there is evidence that an invertebrate creature, right, the U.S. senator, may actually have developed the beginnings of a spine. Maybe. We'll see, right? Anyway, I want to point one other story out. And this is something that I have complained about for a while, but we're going to continue to complain about it. And that is Doge, Elon Musk, right? And Elon Musk, is reported, Doge ordered the GSA, the General Services Administration. This is the central hub that controls all the buildings the government owns. And I mean all the buildings the government owns. Put up a list for buildings that the government owned that they wanted to sell, because Elon said, well, let's sell it. And somebody looked and said, hey, one of the buildings on this list, is actually a CIA black site. Officially, it worked for somebody else, but it was considered an open secret, so open that the press knew about it, and said, hey, you actually put up for sale a CIA black site, FYI, right? Now, here's the problem. One, if you're China, you just got a CIA black site openly revealed. You're going to go there. You're going to observe who comes and goes. Or maybe you've already been observing the people who come and go. But officially, they've said, oh, well, the people that go to that site, they're just IT workers for the Treasury Department. Well, now China goes, hey, we have been watching these guys. And now we know every person there isn't with Treasury. They're with the CIA. So now you've accidentally outed hundreds, potentially thousands of personnel who work in U.S. intelligence. You can't undo that. There is no oopsies, takesies, backsies. You can't just send an email to China and say, we didn't mean to do that. You've got to forget that that those people were outed, right? But CIA officials have also said that some of the government's most sensitive work might be jeopardized, right? CIA leadership told CNN, for example, that it's possible that a group of CIA agents were swept up in a mass layoff or pressured into taking the buyout, right? And that's pretty tough because CIA agents, one, they need to be treated differently. And do you think that a CIA agent, the most sensitive kind, those involved in the most secretive projects, do you think they have an email account that's at CIA.gov? No, dude. Officially, in every government database, it's going to say that they're employees of organizations like the State Department, the Forest Service, the U.S. Department of Agriculture. That's what they're going to say in these departments. And so, remember, Elon Musk and OPM never vetted any of these. They didn't call anyone. They sent out those emails within days. So it's possible that some of these agents may have taken that buyout. It's possible that Elon doesn't even know and that no one can publicly disclose how many CIA agents just got shit canned, right? And the reason no one's going to disclose it in the government is because that itself is information that America's adversaries would like to know. Again, if you sit there and go, hey, let's say everybody that works, for example, I don't know if this is true because I didn't do government IT, but let's say that everybody that works on countering Chinese hackers in the CIA, let's say they all are listed as Forest Service employees. Well, Doge just fired a bunch of Forest Service employees. In fact, they fired forest employees, remember, that appeared to be doing nothing, that appeared to have no job responsibilities. Remember, they sent out an email saying, tell us what you do. And Elon said, well, do you think that a Forest Service employee, even saying, I'm a Forest Service employee and I work on highly sensitive stuff, guys, does it take a genius to figure out who they really are, right? Do you think there's highly sensitive, top secret fucking tree information? No, of course not, right? So you see how there's all of these things that you can't unfuck. You cannot reestablish top secret cover for these people. You've outed them. They're donezo. They're America's adversaries. And we do have adversaries, like it or not, now know who is in these sensitive roles. And again, if you're someone like Elon, you tell me, oh, he's been in touch with Vladimir Putin. He has demanded that everyone in a sensitive role and in a covered role out themselves. And I'm identifying publicly large numbers of CIA black sites, CIA buildings. At some point, you have to sit there and go, this isn't competence. Yeah, Elon Musk doesn't always get it right. He's blown up some spaceships. He's blown up a lot of spaceships. And he's lied about just about every business he's been a part of. So much so that, again, you can Google it. Tesla has a hard time keeping CFOs. And do you know how bad your books have to be cooked for a CFO to not want to be part of the largest automaker, one of the largest US companies in the world, right? But this is on another level. This is at another level of screwing up, right? And literally, this isn't even me speculating. A former CIA officer said this month's email gaffe not only burned agents in the field, but also the well-established position, like working covertly as a U.S. embassy staffer as the agency had circulated in and out. They said your predecessor was in that position, as well as 5 officers before them. Now, host country adversaries know this person going into the position in the embassy is agency, and they assume the predecessors were the same and work backwards to find out their collective footprint. The entire position is now burned. You cannot unfuck that, and it's going to cost millions of dollars. It might not be possible because, again, think about it. You're China, and let's say you find out that the U.S., we're going to keep with my Forest Service example. The U.S. Forest Service representative at the Chinese embassy, they say, yep, they were a spy. Turns out they were in and out of that black site. They get outed as a spy. China goes, everybody who was in those previous 6 positions, the previous 6 entrants, we know that they were CIA spies. And look at all these Chinese officials who had all these meetings with the Forest Service, right? They're going to go and arrest all of those sources. But now here's the other problem. Let's say the U.S. goes, yep, you got us. We're not going to fill the Forest Service position in the Chinese embassy. You got us. Well, what happens when you go, but now there's a U.S. Department of Agriculture position in the U.S. embassy? What do you think the Chinese are going to do? They're going to follow that person. They're going to know. So how do you even cycle in a new person? You can't, right? Not without kicking someone else out of the embassy. So you see how there's not a price. There is no amount of money you can spend to unscrew these kind of things, right? It's like shattering a glass bowl. You can't put it back together. There isn't a scenario where that happens, right? So again, this is unbelievably bad stuff, right? And just so troubling, right? So troubling. And the problem too is that a lot of these Doge employees, some of them are already got access to the highly classified payment system at Treasury. Because remember, the CIA does spend money. It pays sources, for example. Do you think that the Treasury has a record of at least the payments going to it? Right? Don't you think that that sort of thing would be relevant? And now, of course, some of those staffers might actually have left. It's not clear that they ever got cleared. It's not clear that they are even all U.S. citizens. And then, if you're China, I'm sure you would pay a pretty penny to get access to those kids. Anyway, guys, that's all I have. Thank you to folks like Bill Collier, Robert Kohlberg, guys, Martin, Gina, Cresta, Kiss, Courses, Francis Karis, L90, Petra all of our Lieutenant tier members. Couldn't do it without you guys. I appreciate you so much, and I will see you in the next one. Cheers.